My mother used to say a long time ago, whenever there would be any real catastrophe in the movies or on the air, always look for the helpers. There will always be helpers. That's why I think if news programs could make a conscious effort of showing rescue teams, medical people, anyone coming into a place of tragedy, to be sure that they include that. Because if you look for the helpers, you'll always know there's hope. Thank you, Mr. Rogers, for that amazing quote. And with that, welcome to episode number 1 of my new podcast, Find the Helpers, where I will speak with people across the country who have either been there as helpers to others or helped by others. This podcast will look for stories of hope and healing, as we can all use hope in our lives. Rather than the bombardment of the typical news cycle, we will focus on love, civility, and decency. It will be about the best in those around us. With that, I'm honored to have as my very first guests, my personal helpers, and my dear friends, Congressman Ted Deutch and his amazing wife, Jill Deutch. Before we begin, a quick summary of how I became connected with them. As most know, my daughter Jamie was murdered February 14th, 2018 in Parkland, Florida. This was only 4 months after my brother Michael died of cancer related to 9/11. It was the aftermath of these two events that inspired me to write my new book, Find the Helpers. The days following Jamie's murder were a whirlwind, filled with details that I remember deeply and many that I do not. On the day we buried Jamie, this was especially true. This was also the day that I met Ted and Jill. Candidly, I didn't want to meet them. In fact, as a general rule, I did not want any political people at my house. However, my sister and Jill had a mutual friend, and with some arm twisting by my much older, only kidding, Abby, and wiser sister, I agreed to a 10-minute visit. To repeat, it was only supposed to be a 10-minute visit. It didn't end up that way. With that, Jill, would you care to talk about what happened in my driveway that night?
Absolutely. And Fred, thank you for having us on, and we wish you all the best with your podcast.
Thank
So Ted will tell you a little bit more about his role, but he is the congressman who represents Parkland, Florida. And soon after the terrible, horrific shooting there, I received a call, as Fred said, from a friend of mine in Cleveland who knew Fred's sister, Abby, and the family, and said that she was reaching out to connect us. She actually wanted, on behalf of the family, to ask us to come to Jamie's funeral. In a very weird, strange event that could only have happened at this time, we actually couldn't go to Jamie's funeral because we were going to another funeral at the exact same moment. So she instead asked us if we would come to the Shiva to briefly meet Fred so he could talk to Ted about what had gone on and what he had hoped to do in the future. So we went to his house. We were told to call his sister when we got there because he was going to come out and talk to us. I don't think there was any hope that that Fred was going to invite us in. And we came into the driveway, and Fred and Jesse walked out to greet us. And Fred basically came up to Ted and put his finger in Ted's face and said to him, "My daughter was murdered. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure that her name is mentioned in the halls of Congress, and that I will make sure to fight for gun control for the rest of my life. And you're either going to be my best friend or my worst enemy. Which one is it going to be?" And Ted, who has worked for these things throughout his congressional career, said, "Fred, I'm going to be your friend, and we're going to do this together." And then Fred invited us to come inside and meet the rest of his family.
You didn't stay for 10 minutes, did you?
I think we were the last.
I think you were.
Family members to leave.
Truth is, our family fell in love with you guys that night, and I was thrilled to have you there. We were going through our personal grief, but I always say to people, we all have our story, and for you, not just as the representative, but this was your community. It shook you guys too. I'd love to hear more about what you were going through and feeling on those days.
Well, I also want to thank you, Fred, for having us and wish you great success with the podcast. We're really, really honored to be your first guests, and something you I don't think now. I was obsessed with Mr. Rogers um, throughout my childhood, and that was really, really good advice he gave that helped a lot of us. Um, I, I have often said, you've heard me say this, that fighting gun violence is something that we should all be committed to, and every member of Congress has a role to play, and you shouldn't have to have a mass shooting take place in your congressional district for this to matter to you. I said that on the House floor multiple times, and then when it does, it just becomes intensely personal. And I was chairing a foreign affairs hearing and got a text from someone on my staff whose daughter told her there was a shooter on campus, and she was hiding in the band room, and I found out what happened, got home as quickly as I could, and we then spent literally every day for the next couple weeks, and a part of every day really since, not just looking for ways to deal with this in Congress to try to stop it from ever happening again, but just trying to be there for the community, for you and your family, for all of the other families, and for so many people who were really, really hurting over what happened in their community, whether they were directly impacted or not. Everybody was impacted personally, and it's the most important role that I have, is to try to be there for the community. So when you invited us to your house and you stood there and jabbed your finger at me,
my sister invited you.
That's right. That's right. After your sister invited us to your house,
us inside,
and we drove over, really, really nervous because it felt uncomfortable at this really personal time for us to be coming in. But we realized then that this was personal to you. You saw that for us in our own way, it was personal to us, and we've been friends and working together and fighting this battle since that first moment that we met. And it's I would agree. I would just echo what you said before, Fred. I think I don't hesitate saying it, since you said the same thing. We wish that we didn't have this relationship, care as deeply for you and your family as we do. But this is what happened to you. It happened to our community, and the result is we have this relationship that gives us the opportunity to work on these things together, and to do everything we can to help you and the other families honor the memories of those who were lost, and work to protect people in our community and all around the country.
You know, one of the reasons, well, there's a lot of reasons why I needed you guys to be the first guest. And it is partly based upon the personal relationship, but you are also my first experience with an unexpected helper at an unexpected time. You know, I expected my friends and family to be there for me. I didn't expect Congressman Deutch and his wife Jill to be there the way they were literally from the day that I buried Jamie. And I know that for the two of you, you were going through some real emotional stuff over this happening too. You had to visit the families or go to the funerals, but this was your community. And I've been there with you at an event since, some over the next few weeks, next few months, where you tried to be stoic, but occasionally the emotion got to you. I just want to hear from you both how you go about balancing that public and private place.
Go ahead.
Fred, when you invited us in your house that night, we got to meet Jen, your wife. We got to meet Jesse. We met the grandparents of Jamie, cousins of Jamie, aunts and uncles. And through all of them, we got to meet Jamie. We got to know Jamie, and they told us their stories. And because of that, that for us was a moment when we felt so connected to you and to someone who we never ever had the pleasure of knowing while she lived. And that helped us to move forward. And it was hard, but for us, every moment that was hard was sort of like we were experiencing it through you and through seeing your pain and through the pain of the other families who we interacted with. And and it sort of became almost like a job that we were carrying these stories forward, and sharing them and trying to make something come from these stories and help create change and a difference in the future.
Um, it's um, it's a balancing act for me, Fred, in the work that I'm supposed to that I'm honored to do. Um, People they don't really they don't want me to be a big crybaby who who goes around and yells a little bit and
But he kind of is.
um,
But
and
that's what I love about you. You're a human being.
I mean, but it's yeah. To your point, um, when you go when after a bunch of funerals and after getting to know families and not everyone I mean you know this better than I mean some of the families weren't interested in talking to me at all at the beginning, and I tried and didn't have the opportunity right away to let them know that I was reaching out as much as a human being, as an elected official. I cared about them, and over time, as we got to know you and know the families and see the incredible commitment that exists to honor the lives lost. It's easy on the one hand. It's easy to really dedicate myself to fighting the legislative battles, but personally, yeah, there were moments. There still are moments, but there are moments where the magnitude of what happened and the intense way that so many people were feeling it, so many people that I am privileged to have gotten to know deeply are feeling it, that it's hard, but that's not it. As Jill said, it's our, like, together, I think we look at this as our responsibility to try to be there for you and for others, and to make sure that we're helping to elevate you and the other students at the school, the survivors. That's sort of the role that we have to keep thinking about, even especially in those early days, even when it was really, really challenging.
If I can jump in and say one more thing.
Absolutely.
Ted attended several of the funerals where he did not go talk to the families. He sat in the back. He wanted to be there. He wanted to bear witness. And later, some of the people said, I didn't know you were at that funeral. I didn't know you were there. And it was interesting at the time. I said to him, should you tell them? Should you let somebody know that you're coming? And what we learned, you said you were surprised by our friendship, but we were also surprised that people wanted us and wanted, that was important to them. And you were the first people who actually asked for it. But we had to sort of learn a little bit more about our role, that we could be there. And each situation was different, but that there was an interest in having us there. So that was something that we played with in the beginning, as we weren't sure what our role is and if we would be welcomed or not. But in every case, we really were.
I look back on that time, and it was, parts of it are a blur and parts of it are ingrained. I can tell you what I said the night at the vigil about feeling broken probably summed it up best. I don't know what I wanted. All that I knew is that every day as I went forward from there, people surprised me in a really decent and wonderful way. And I guess this is part of why I wrote the book, because I do hope people open themselves up to the connectedness with others and help from others. I wouldn't be where I'm at today, 2.5 years later, without that, without people like you who unexpectedly became a part of my life. And so, I had no expectations that night you came to my house that it would be anything more than a 10-minute thing, but it was. And 3 weeks later, I found myself in Washington, D.C. And you basically gave your office to me. I mean, not just physical space, but your staff helped me coordinate and organize everything. One of your staff members shadowed me all day long, so I got everywhere I needed to go, had a chance to hear every conversation, including the one that was a follow-up with Senator Rubio to the CNN town hall, which was pretty rough. But the help you provided, in fact, that was even the visit where you got me scheduled to testify in front of the Senate subcommittee, where I referred to the NRA as a terrorist organization. And we did a town hall at night. What was also special or unique about that day was it tested my commitment to this notion that I was going to stand the entire day. And you had to stand through that with me. And I appreciate you, because as long as I was standing, you stood. But I didn't want to make people feel comfortable talking about the loss of my daughter. I was, especially back then, still feeling broken. I don't know if I shared it with you back then, but that morning, just before walking into your office, I had a very emotional, a little bit of a breakdown, actually sitting right outside your office building. My daughter, Jamie, knew how to access my phone. Codes didn't matter. She could figure it out. And she put on random days in my calendar this thing called Love Jamie Day, which was kind of like a Valentine's Day on steroids. Whenever it would show up, I would text her in school, and I would have to just completely do the whole Valentine's Day on steroids thing for her, because it was Love Jamie Day. That morning, as I was getting out of my Uber and walking into your building, the calendar reminder came up on my phone. It was Love Jamie Day. So before I walked into your office, I literally had to sit down on the steps outside that building, and I cried for a while. But then it was clear to me Jamie was sending me a message that she was with me on this visit to DC while you were going to guide me and show me how to get through this town. And with you and Jamie that day, I got through it. It was exhausting. It was brutal, but I got through it. And I don't know that people recognize the level of help you provided, not only to me, but to the other families that asked for it as well. I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about some of those things.
Well, first of all, Fred, I didn't know that, but it makes sense. I mean, it was Jamie who was guiding you that day. I was just making sure you wound up in the right offices. But I remember right when I came back to DC after being home for a couple of weeks after the 14th, after the shooting, we brought my office together and said that while I'm sure we had a whole agenda of, I don't remember, of course, at the time, any of it, but I'm sure there was a whole agenda that we were working on, all kinds of issues, lots of different things I care about. And I just told them that that none of them are less important than they were before, but we were going to do everything that we possibly could to be helpful to the people from our community, whether they were coming to DC and wanted to set up meetings, and we arranged a lot of meetings, and nobody could say no, and it was really, really powerful to have you there. So we arranged a lot of meetings. Other way we got really involved with the other members who had tragedies like this in their communities, and tried to really we tried to just bolster the efforts that you and some of the other families and so many of the young people had already started, to make sure that it just wasn't going to be the same, that I knew you were going to come to DC once and then go back home. The kids weren't going to come up, talk to the speaker, and then go back and just throw themselves back into school. It was different. Everyone, and it wasn't just here, they knew from the town hall meeting going forward that it was different. It's a different community. The people were maybe it was just that there had been so much violence in schools, in outside of schools, in urban communities, in rural communities, everywhere around the country. Maybe people had just had enough, and then that town hall meeting gave you a national voice, gave others that same opportunity, and everyone seized it. And so our goal was just to make sure that you had every opportunity that you could to be heard, and to take that really powerful and horrific, the powerful story about this horrific moment, and share it to try to create change. And you did. And I was only too proud to help accompany you on that mission. And that, just one last thing, Fred, that night when we did the event at the high school, and with my colleague, with Don Beyer, and saw the massive number of people who poured in, and so many young people.
It was unbelievable.
We knew that this was different, and that your voice was going to be, and has continued to be, so powerful.
I've said this to you, that you are so authentic and also fearless. And you responded to me by saying that you aren't afraid of anything because the most scary thing had already happened to you. But that authenticness and fearlessness about you is, and because you aren't a politician, and I'm not saying that in any disrespect to politicians, but
none taken.
But
I'm just an annoyance to many of them.
But because there is nothing that holds you back, you do not measure your words, and you are fearless. That has just made you be so effective in what you're doing. And whether you call it looking for the helpers or something else, you have harnessed so many incredible relationships, people who you've used, and I don't say used in a bad way, who you've brought along with you to help try to accomplish what is at your heart and what you're trying to do. And that's unbelievable, the relationships that you've built. Ted is just one of the many, many, many.
Both of you.
Us.
But, with regards to fear, my daughter died running down a hallway, knowing there was an active shooter at her back. I'll never, ever, ever have the kind of fear that she had. And because I know that, it sort of has killed the notion of fear for me. Things like butterflies in the stomach, I don't get them anymore, and anxiety over who I'm going to meet. Life is so different for me now. I really do. I see people as they can either help me with this mission to save lives, or they can be a hindrance, and I don't mean to make it that simple, but too many people dying in this country every day from a preventable reason, and we will do something about it. But what makes, I think, your efforts really unique, because they haven't only been with me, I mean, Max or Tony would stand with Parkland, or the others would stand with Parkland. Things that would be classified as Democratic issues or Republicans, because you've reached across the aisle and you've worked with the families and you've worked with people on both sides of the aisle, all in the interest of safety, safety from gun violence, safety in schools. Um, has has this whole process, is this the way you've always been actually when legislating? I mean, can you talk a little bit about some of the other families and some of those efforts? And has that been a different approach to legislating than in the past?
It's a really good question. And first, can I just go back for a second, Fred? Because when you draw a line, you said maybe I shouldn't do this. When you draw a line and you put the world into two categories, people who either want to try to save lives or people who don't, I think that is absolutely, that is a fair line to be drawn, and there is and as angry as you get or I get or others get when people don't want to stand on the right side of that line, I think the way you put that is really powerful, and so we should all be on that side of the line. Look, in terms of how I do what I do, I yes, I try to work. I mean, Congress is the House is a big place, 435 members, and then you throw in the Senate, and you got to get a president to sign anything. So it's really hard to do anything on a partisan level. It's pretty much impossible. So you need to be able to work with others, and I certainly have tried to do that. I've done that on lots of issues. But in this case, this is it's really because of, I mean, I know your book is Find the Helpers, but I mean the help that we've gotten from you and from so many family members, all in different ways. I mean, the way you do things is different than Change the Ref, for example.
My good friend Manny,
yeah,
my
Manny's,
brother.
Right. And Manny's amazing. It just does things differently and dramatically, and that's artistically that's really impactful. And then the stand with
Manny
Parkland,
makes his presence known.
always.
Absolutely.
And the stand with Parkland folks have this sort of single-minded focus on working with anyone who will help them, and so the result of all of this is you've got all of these people that I work with who I suppose I need to reach out to them, but when I tell them that it's because of you or these other families from Parkland, or just keeping our kids and our schools safe, our communities safe, they're going to at least listen seriously. And then when you come into a meeting and we bring others into a meeting, it's hard to not want to spend the time to try to figure out some way to work together. If you can't find ways to work together to save lives like this, then it's never going to be possible. Are there challenges? I mean, how much time have we spent talking about what the NRA does and the work that they do every day on behalf of gun makers? And but there are challenges to be overcome, and ultimately everyone who's elected office gets elected by real people who have families and kids, and they listen to you talk about what happened, and they listen to others talk about what happened, and it becomes real for them, and it could be them or their family, and they want to do what they can to make sure it isn't.
Since you mentioned elected, and we have an election coming up, and I'm not sure everybody running in this election actually listens to real people. So let's start there. This election is not like any other election in our lifetime. This is not the election where you can walk into the voting booth and say, I'm going to hold my nose. They're all the same. And I'm just going to pull the lever and whatever happens, happens. That's not this election. We have an occupant in the White House right now. who I don't think it's improper to say is actively working to undermine our democracy. And as somebody who is passionate about this one particular issue of gun violence, I fear if we don't get this election right, meaning electing Joe Biden and flipping the Senate, not only does the issue of gun violence not get solved, it gets ended. The ability to do something about it. And I don't mean to sound overly dramatic, but I think the consequences are that stark. Because legislatively, imagine the Trump and McConnell again. It won't get taken up, but you'll have more Kavanaughs. And so the consequences in this election are stark. If we want decency, honesty, civility, and those who will work for our public safety, we need to bring more people like you to Washington, D.C. I see the only way to do that on the presidency side is electing Joe Biden. We gotta, I don't know that, we'll get Mitch McConnell out of the Senate, but we got to get him out of the majority leader seat. And, so I want to know your thoughts. Am I being too dramatic, or do you see it as starkly as I do?
No, it's pretty stark. And I know this is your podcast and you're doing the interview, but every election is not just a referendum, although on that alone, I think this election's easy. But there are two candidates, and I know you write in your book, and I've heard you talk about it, about Vice President Biden. So I'm happy to talk about why this election is so serious, but I'd rather do it after you tell us and why it's so personal for you this way.
Yeah, listen, when he gave his speech at the convention, which was an amazing speech, I turned to Jen and I said, the reason why he was able to deliver that speech that way is that's who he is. It wasn't manufactured. It wasn't BS. That was Joe Biden. He reached out to me on the phone maybe 10 days after Jamie was killed. And when I saw phone numbers that I didn't recognize, I didn't pick up the phone because I was getting bombarded with calls. He left a message and he said, I am going to call you back at this time. So please pick up the phone. And I did. We ended up talking for about 45 minutes. He was on the train from Virginia to New York for a Bill Biden event. And then following that, a few weeks later, met with him in person. One of the other dad, Max, and I went to meet with him in person at another Bill Biden event, but this time in Palm Beach. What he spoke to me about in both meetings was so deep and personal, but the most meaningful advice for dealing with grief that any person gave me. And it wasn't just a casual, here, I've been through this, let me tell you what you need to know. The reason why the call and the in-person meeting were so long, he wanted to get to know me. He wanted to know about my family, about Jamie. And he then spoke to me, and then at that second meeting with Max, about mission and purpose, how that has guided him. What really blew me away, though, is the second piece of important advice that he gave me, that he came prepared to give us in that in-person meeting, because I would have never expected this from this person who was a vice president and now running for the presidency. But he came to talk to us about our marriages and our children and how the grieving process is different for everybody. And he wanted us to know that because I believe the statistic is 92% of all marriages fail after an event like this. And he wanted us to know that, not to scare us, but to make sure we knew it. So he had a plan to make sure we weren't going to be in that awful statistic. He wanted me to know, you may choose to go through it this way, but you need to make sure you're paying attention to how your family's going through it and finding ways to support them however they're going through it. I got to tell you the truth. Nobody else has ever said that to me, but he was right. And the fact that he took the time to talk to me about this, I'll never forget. And the crazy thing is, and this is Joe Biden. The in-person meeting was at a fundraiser. I think he had like 200 people waiting for him in this house. I just thought he'd take us into a private room, he'd shake our hands, and he'd tell, the cursory stuff. He said, sit down. Okay, we'll sit for 5 minutes. 20 minutes later, I said to him, you have a house full of people out there waiting for you. Don't you need to go? And he said, this is more important, because that's who he is. And then he stayed with us for about another 20 minutes. The most decent, genuine, empathetic, caring person I could have ever hoped for stepped into my life at that moment when I needed it. And he's now running for the presidency. All I can say is contrast that with who's there now.
That, right. And that kind of decency, on a look, we could spend a whole hour, separate podcast talking about this election, but we happen to be having this conversation after a few days where the news broke that the president said he didn't want to go visit a cemetery because people, they're losers and suckers.
What a great point.
And so that was his response. And then when pressed on it today, said, well, those generals, they don't really like me anyway, because all they care about is fighting wars to line the pockets of the big military arms producers or something like that. The difference between, and we can talk about policy, we can talk about how I sat a couple seats away from the president in the White House when he swore to me that they were going to do background checks, and that they never happened before because the Republicans were afraid of the NRA.
He kept telling
them cowards, and then he showed what a coward he is on this issue. We talk about all that, but just on what you described, that guy, the vice president of the United States, who's now running for president, who just treated you like a human being, like he treats everyone, with respect and empathy and decency, and understands why it's so important to bring people together. And what we've been reminded of again from this president, that ultimately it is always about him and refusing to ever take responsibility for anything. Yeah, you're darn right. This election is the most important election, certainly of my lifetime. And there's a whole lot at stake, but don't we want to be a country where we're not always fighting with one another, and where the guy who sits in the Oval Office isn't busy trying to divide us and demean us and belittle us, but is actually working to help bring us together and lift us up?
Amen.
Amen. Listen, we all just better show up and vote. And more than showing up to vote, we better start like now with what is our plan to vote, and making sure our vote counts, not wait until the last minute. This is not the election to do that. Just a couple more things, because I would be remiss if I didn't talk to you about the nation's kids and the kids from Parkland. And I certainly am one who was blown away by my underestimation of our nation's kids and the kids from Parkland. Didn't expect what they've become, the leaders that so many of them are showing they will be. What are your thoughts and feelings on the kids?
I think Ted can speak to really getting to know them and working closely with a lot of them. And I think to this day still chatting with them, whether it's called mentoring or being a friend to them. But that still continues with a lot of those relationships that were built. But for me, who is maybe one step removed from it, it was really a spectacular thing to watch. We've all seen, these tragedies hit communities, and the media attention be attached to that community like a laser for a few days, for a week, and then move away. And I think one of the most important things that these kids did, but also the parents and spouses for people who were married to the teachers, is that they were able in a unique way that I don't think has ever happened before, to keep the attention on this community and on this issue. And I give everybody who was involved, especially those spectacular kids, so much credit for that, all while they were being criticized by some being crisis actors and faking it, and that we as adults were, putting them, using them, and they stood up to so much, and they were so spectacular and continue to be so. But I just think that one of the best things was that they were able to keep this attention, the nation's attention on this for a long time, and even until today.
Yeah.
It's one of the, and I say this really without hesitation, one of the most remarkable experiences that I've had since I've been in politics, really in my life, is watching these young people and watching them say, don't tell us that we're going to be the leaders of the future. Don't tell us that you have hope for our generation, and that if you just do this, this, and that eventually you'll really be able to contribute. They looked at this situation and said, we're tired of seeing our friends killed in school beside us. Nobody should have to go through this. We're just not going to sit back. And I know, and everyone always points to Congress and says, well, okay, the House passed legislation and McConnell sitting on it hasn't done anything, let alone the president. Well, that's true, but you know why the House passed the legislation we passed? I mean, you know this, Fred. It's because we have a gun safety majority. Why? Because these kids traveled around the country and got other young people involved and their families involved, got them involved in politics over this issue, and they made a difference. And they did work that led to major corporations changing their policies, and they passed laws at the state level and the local level, local ordinances. I mean, the impact has been incredible. And when I think about the first time I visited the March for Our Lives headquarters, at
the super secret headquarters,
the super secret headquarters at the kids' dining room table. And I walked in, and they were just they were sitting around, and they were really frustrated because their parents had just texted them to tell them they wanted to have a meeting with the kids and the families. And one of them said, I love my mom for wanting to do this, but I don't have time for these kinds of meetings. I'm trying to save lives. And they haven't stopped. And it's like everyone else who is involved. I mean, for some of the kids, they've had struggles, and and we just try to be there for them too. But mostly, we just are in awe of the leadership that they display and continue to display, and the way that kids literally everywhere around the country look to them as the kind of examples of what young people can do now, right now, not when they graduate from college, not when they've been out in the workforce, but right now they have immense power, and they're using it, and they're going to do it again in this election.
I'll just say one personal thing is we have 3 children who, at the time of the shooting, we had 3 who were in college at the same time. I also work on a college campus. I work with kids at Hillel. And so to see the kids who did not go to school in Parkland, but were still so incredibly moved and changed by this event. I mean, for my three kids, it was incredibly, incredibly impactful. It spurred them on to so much activism around the issue of gun safety. And I think probably for you, Fred, and the other parents and students and survivors, like you can't even know when we go out in the world and we say where we're from and what district Ted represents, and they say, do you know Fred? Do you know the kids? Do you know this one? Do you know Max? Like Manny, everybody. It's the world is so inspired by you and by the March for Our Lives kids, and we're so proud just to say we know you when we are out in the world on our travels.
Well, the thing that blew me away about the kids, and I'm still a father of two teenagers. I may not visit the one behind me the way I used to, but I'm still a father of two teenagers. And based upon what I saw, I thought this device was ruining our kids' ability to communicate. We always saw them messing around. I had that wrong, because these kids, not only do they know how to communicate, they are fierce and they know exactly what they want. And this device that I thought was ruining them, this became their weapon. They use this thing to strategize and organize and maneuver at a speed that we can't keep up with. So I'm just so thankful and proud of them. Now, I also am demanding that they all make sure they continue with their schooling and their education, because we do need them as our future leaders. And so they've got to get that done. But, I just needed to hear your thoughts. So with that, I have one more question for you both. This is my first podcast, and I'm kind of going to make this my signature question, so everyone else will get to prepare for it.
So we're guinea pigs, Fred?
You're the guinea pigs. But I want people to know something about you each that nobody knows, but that you would like them to know.
I don't think I can tell you something that nobody knows, but I might be able to tell you that not everybody knows. How about
Okay.
So every Friday night, our family celebrates Shabbat, whether we're together or apart. But every Friday, I bake homemade challah, and almost every Friday, I bake extra and take it to somebody who needs some sort of pick-me-up, whether it's if they're sad, if they're sick, if they're on their own. And that's what I do. And I've never made one for you, Fred. I'm making...
Find the helpers.
Okay.
That's what
So now that you know this about me, I'm making challah for you and Jen and Jesse, and you will both thank me and curse me for it, because it's delicious but very fattening. I can't wait to bring you one.
I can't wait to taste it. Your turn, my friend.
Right. That's, by the way, just one way that it's just an example of how Jill just brings kindness everywhere.
Okay.
It's what she does.
Your story.
Again, probably some people know this, and I don't. And for people who've been to my office in DC, they would know. So I play the piano, and I really like to play the piano, but
he's really good.
We never did get to go to Billy Joel, by the way.
Not yet.
Well, there's a pandemic. It's going to be
one day. He's resting up. He'll be ready for us.
We're going to do that.
I'll play. I'll give you a Billy Joel recital. So I play the piano and I write songs, but mostly I use it as an outlet. This gets back to what you asked before. Like, sometimes this must catch up with you too. And I have spent a lot of time in my life sitting at the piano, playing things as they come to me from my heart to help get through both challenging times and good times. It brings me immense joy. I can't believe. Well, I guess you've never heard that either.
In peace.
And
so
helps with
some Friday night, Jen and I are coming to your house for challah and piano.
And
Chardonnay.
That is and Chardonnay.
Or tequila.
Cheers to you, Fred.
Guys, I love you.
We're doing that. We love you back, Fred. And we love Jen.
This is really great. When you just remember, when you get to your 50th and your 100th and your 500th podcast, just remember we were there for you at the very beginning, Fred.
Always going to be number one.
And we're always
we are always here for you. Always here for you. This is really, really great. Thanks. We're really honored that you gave us this opportunity. And I know I said this before, but let me be a little more direct. Your book is Find the Helpers, and it's beautiful and really inspirational. But the message, I think, also for you from the rest of us is to, as you're helping us think about these people who have helped you, is to recognize what enormous help you've provided to us and to so many people we know, and really the whole country.
An incredible inspiration. The book is amazing. The book is truly amazing, and so are you.
I love you both.
Love you back.
You too, Fred. Thanks so much.